Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast from the Timberwolves' loss in the preseason finale to the Brooklyn Nets. We did get to see Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert play together. We'll talk extensively about that today on the show. What went right, what went wrong, what's got to get cleaned up, and what to look out for over the first couple weeks of the regular season, plus individual studs and duds from Wolves Nets. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend. Hopefully you had a fantastic week. This is the post-game podcast. We're going to talk Wolves Nets in the preseason finale from late on Friday. Here on the show today. First of all, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find this show. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T Wolves and at Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. Also one other place you can find Locked On Wolves. I should mention this again. The brand new Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both the Roku on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can find the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. Locked On Wolves plus all the other fantastic Locked On Minnesota podcasts can be found there. You can download it for free on Roku or Amazon Fire TV today. All right. As mentioned, this is the post-game podcast, the final preseason post-game pod before real actual basketball, regular season basketball starts next Wednesday between the Wolves and the Oklahoma City Thunder. Today, I want to hit my key takeaway, as we always do, from Wolves Nets here right away. Then we'll get into some additional takeaways and then finally individual studs and duds. Obviously, the big story from Friday night's game was this is the first and the only time in the preseason, first time period in game action, only time in the preseason that we'll see Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert playing together for the Timberwolves. This is the first chance that anyone had a chance to see them on the floor together. And it looked pretty much exactly how I and most people, I think, thought it would look the first time around. At times, tantalizing, pretty much unstoppable. But most of the time, at least on Friday, it was clunky. It was a little bit awkward. It was, trying to figure out who's rolling, who's popping, who's, just the spacing wasn't really there. There were kind of a couple of possessions where D'Lo was just throwing a pass kind of in between Rudy and Cat and like, hey, one of them will grab it. Somebody's supposed to be there, but it's in between them. There were a few of those possessions here and there. It was absolutely not attractive offense in the first quarter for the Wolves, but it also at times looked like a lot of fun. So I don't know. It was kind of a like it again is kind of what I expected it to be, in which you watch it and in one moment you're like, man, this is going to be completely unstoppable, and in the next moment it's a brutal turnover. Early in the game, the Wolves only scored 22 points in the first quarter. They scored at least 26 in the remaining three, and actually, if in the second half, the Wolves actually outscored the Nets by 6 in a game that they ultimately lost by 10. So it was really the first half where the Wolves struggled mightily, and especially the first quarter. The biggest issue, again, was spacing. And it was just kind of understanding who needed to be where and when. And that's just a function of needing to play together more often. And it's not just Rudy, it's also Jaden McDaniels. I mean, obviously Jaden was on this team last year, but early in the season when he started, he came off the bench for the majority of the season, including late in the year, and didn't play a ton of minutes down the stretch in the season with Ant and with D'Lo. I mean, occasionally he was in crunch time lineups for his defense, and he was more of an offensive threat than Jared Vanderbilt was, for instance. But as a starter, there wasn't much synergy with Jaden McDaniels either, and he's clearly still trying to find his footing, as everyone is, in this new grouping of 5. Some of the more fun things that happened, though, the Wolves Chris Finch just decided to try a bunch of different sets. They ran a couple of different horn sets. We saw some cross screen action where Rudy and Towns each went to the elbows, and then we saw Rudy cross screen for Towns, who came across, got a pass and shot a mid range jumper from about 16 feet, 18 feet, right beyond the free throw line. It rimmed out, but it was a nice play call. And Towns is typically money from that spot on the floor, even though a wide open mid range shot is a good shot. It's the contested mid range shots that aren't. And with somebody like Towns or a D'Lo or somebody that's getting a wide open 16, 18 footer, then they should take them. That was nice action. They ran a couple double drag screens kind of in secondary break transition. They did several different versions of stagger screens, and with other, backside action happening as part of them. There was one play in the first half where they ran stagger screens on the right side of the floor with Jaden McDaniels handling the ball, which I thought was really interesting. And it was clearly like a secondary reaction to whatever the primary action had been on that play. But Towns and Rudy setting screens, that's a pretty dynamic duo of screen setters. And then out of that, you could do anything. You could have Rudy then come and set a down screen for Towns to pop. You could have Towns pop after, if he sets the high screen, Towns could pop and Rudy could roll from the low screen. Again, the idea of a pin down from Rudy to Towns to let Towns pop out outside the arc is a really attractive one. And you could also, those are only two options you could do it. There's so many different ways that you could play with that. So that was really interesting. My favorite play was one, and I need to watch it back, but Towns got a catch in the low post on the left side of the floor. This is in the first half. And Rudy set an off-ball screen for D'Lo to kind of free him. Towns kicked it back to D'Lo, and then Rudy rescreened with a ball screen and rolled to the basket, got a dump-off pass at the rim, and he sealed the defender. I think it was Ben Simmons who had switched on to him. He had been trying to trap D'Lo, and then after Rudy set the screen, and he really kind of more slipped it, and just kind of sunk to the basket, Ben Simmons had to go with him, and Rudy pinned him down low and drew a foul on Simmons and got to the free throw line. But that sort of an action, because you either get Towns single coverage in the post. If he gets doubled, you kick it to D'Lo, who should be open after Rudy sets the off-ball screen. If he's not open, now Rudy's rolling to the basket. You got that option, or you can kick it back to Towns if he is, at that point, maybe he's spaced out to the corner, or if he's reposting. I guess he's probably not reposting if Rudy's rolling right there, but he can spot up in the corner, and then either D'Lo can hit Cat, or he can hit Rudy, who can kick it right back to the corner, and you can play a three-man game on that side of the floor with those three. And it's tough to find a better trio. I mean, frankly, league-wide, Gobert rolling, Towns post to popping to the perimeter, and D'Lo ball handling and pick and roll. Those are three top-flight, contributors at those specific roles across the NBA. So to have those guys all doing that in one play set on one side of the floor is really dangerous. I thought that was a really impressive play, and it ended with Gobert getting free throws, which was a ton of fun. And then the other thing with Rudy is we're already starting to see the confidence that the Timberwolves players have in throwing Gobert the ball around the rim. Understandably, they were kind of reticent to do that with Jared Vanderbilt. But with Rudy Gobert, you can just throw it in the vicinity of the bucket, and Rudy's likely going to get it with his wingspan. He's got good hands. I know some Jazz fans were, wanted to hate on Rudy's hands at times during his tenure. And I mean, the guy's 7'2" or whatever of course he's going to not catch every single ball you throw to him. He's not an NFL wide receiver, but the wingspan and clearly the hands are leaps and bounds better than what the Wolves were working with Vando last year. The confidence Wolves players have to throw Rudy the ball, and then Rudy not only to catch, but also to finish, to draw fouls. His dexterity around the rim is really impressive. And obviously he's got that in spades. On defense, it takes a lot of talent to block at the rim, block shots at the rim without fouling with both hands. And Rudy can do that. Clearly he's very talented and knows how to control his body extremely well. And then on the defensive side, early in the game, there were a couple of possessions. The Wolves obviously played a lot of drop, pick and roll coverage, pretty much exclusively drop when Rudy was in the game. And there was one play where the Wolves got the stop and Rudy impacted the play. I can't remember who the ball handler was for the Nets. It wasn't Kyrie, but they took kind of a tough fall away on the right baseline because Rudy was lurking. Towns was able to get the rebound because Rudy was boxing out. The Wolves went back the other way. They turned it over. The Nets came back 2-on-1, and Rudy forced a tough kind of like 8-foot, another weird like fall away because the ball handler was afraid of getting to the rim with Rudy there. So back-to-back possessions, Rudy Gobert did not get a block shot, but he forced two missed shots and helped get a defensive rebound for a teammate simply because of his presence, his positioning on the floor, and the fact that guys don't want to challenge Rudy Gobert. So that was kind of the gist of the of what I took away from the early stint in the game. Again, the offense was clunky. We'll get a little bit more into that here in a minute, but the possibilities and the different sets, the creativity of Chris Finch. I think 3 of 5 preseason games, my main takeaway has been related to Finch's offense and how much fun it is. We saw that here on Friday night between the Wolves and the Nets. I have a couple more key takeaways I want to get to before we do individual studs and duds. First, let's talk about our title sponsors of today's show, and that is, of course, our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every single game you can find. Headed into another football full weekend, college on Saturday, pro on Sunday. The Gophers are back in action after a rough loss a couple weeks ago, a bye week last week. They play Saturday morning, and I think the Vikings play Sunday afternoon. It's a full weekend of football, and if you're at all considering betting on football, BetOnline is the place to do it. Also, win totals. I'll tell you, it's your last chance to get in on that for the NBA, so make sure to do that. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sport wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, playoff baseball ongoing, plus MMA, boxing, and golf, and more. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, additional takeaways from Wolves Nets on Friday night, the preseason finale. Let's talk a little bit about the defense first. The defense in general was not bad in this game. I know that the Wolves gave up, and what they end up giving up 112. Yeah, 112. They gave up, what was the first half total? I don't have it in front of me. The defense wasn't that bad. This was just a case of outstanding offense from the Nets. And if you just glance at the box score and you're like, KD had 20, Kyrie had 26, no big deal. Well, these guys only played 30 minutes apiece. It wasn't like a 35, 36-minute showing. Those guys each would have had 30. In the first half especially, they were completely unstoppable. Kevin Durant was just unreal. Kyrie was even better for stretches in the first half. And the Wolves had some good possessions against them late. Jaden McDaniels locked down KD a couple of times, had a couple of real ticky-tack foul calls. Jaden continues to struggle. This actually should be a separate takeaway, but Jaden had 2 instances where he slid underneath Durant on the perimeter and got called for the sliding underneath the feet of a jump shooter rule, which I think was the right call in both situations. But there were 2 or 3 other calls on Jaden that were real ticky-tack, but he did a good job overall on KD. And I mean, Ant blocked Durant's shot at one point in the second half. Ant locked down Kyrie in the first half after Irving had been cooking for a while. Ant said, "I'll take on this ISO, possession," and stopped Kyrie on a tough mid-range fall-away attempt from Irving. But in the first half, the Wolves defense, like the very beginning of the game, was a little bit slow and sluggish, just like the offense. But I'd say even 3 or 4 minutes into the first quarter, the Wolves defense really locked in. It became extremely active. And for the majority of the night, the Wolves defense was pretty good. They were contesting shots. They were helping. They were helping the helper. They were boxing out. They were being physical on the glass in general. And it was really just more a function of the Nets were hitting tough shots. I mean, rebounds were even in this game. That wasn't the issue. The biggest thing for me was just the first part of the game. Otherwise, the Nets were shot makers. And again, the box score stats aren't super gaudy for the Nets, but the third quarter was a little rougher for those guys. The first half shooting numbers were fantastic. And then also getting to the free throw line. That's another takeaway for this one, is that the Wolves were out free throwed in this game pretty significantly in the first half. It changed in the second half, and that's part of the reason the Wolves got back into it. But I think the first half was like 20 free throws for the Nets to like 6 for the Wolves. It ended up for the game, the Wolves had 34 and the Nets only had 28, but that completely flipped. The Wolves did become more aggressive in the second half, but they also just did a better job of defending without fouling. The offense in general was a little crisper in the second half for Minnesota, even though it wasn't like really impressive at any point. It was at least smoother. They just missed more shots in the second half, which is actually another takeaway that I've got. So takeaway number 3 of this segment is the Timberwolves just miss shots that they aren't typically going to miss at this frequency in the regular season. Now, they ended up shooting a better percentage from the field for the game than Brooklyn, but the 3-point shooting was not close. Brooklyn was 14 of 35. The Wolves were 7 of 33. So Brooklyn 40% from three. You'll take that every night of the week. The Wolves were 21.2% from three. Really rough shooting night from three. Cat was 1 of 6. Ant was 3 of 7 and got hot at one point. I think it was third quarter where he made 2-3 in a row. Bryn Forbes was 0 for 4 from three, which is obviously uncharacteristic of Forbes. So the Nets they were flamethrowers. Kyrie was hitting tough shots. KD was hitting tough shots. There were a couple open three-pointers here and there. That's going to happen. I think it was just more shot making by the Nets than bad defense by the Wolves. And then on the flip side, on offense, the execution for Minnesota was real bad in the first half. They deserved to be down double digits at halftime. That wasn't, not arguing that at all. Second half, though, the execution was much better. It was much smoother. I don't know that I'd call it crisp, but it was crisper than the first half. And then they were just missing open shots again. And Bryn Forbes were culprits there. D'Lo was really the only guy that you had much confidence in shooting the ball in this game. It felt like when he was open, he was going to make it. And that even when he wasn't open, D'Lo had a nice game from the floor as well. So those are kind of my key additional takeaways. I will say in the fourth quarter, when it was a close-ish game, the Wolves got it down to, I don't know, it was like 8 points or something at one point in the fourth quarter. I don't know that they ever got closer than that. And then the turnover issues kind of cropped back up after having a much cleaner third quarter. Then suddenly it was turnover city again for the Wolves. They ended up with 16, which is only one more than the Nets. 6 of the 16 were by D'Angelo Russell. But I said this off the top of the show. A lot of them weren't really his fault. It was just kind of like guys weren't where they needed to be. D'Lo was trying to find, Cat or Rudy and was throwing the ball between the two of them. And obviously D'Lo bears some responsibility for that. But to me, it was more other guys not necessarily being in the right spot at the right time, and D'Lo just doing, his best to make something out of nothing. So, the biggest takeaway here for the game, as I said off the top, is the creativity, the possibilities of the offense. At the same time, just how kind of stuck in the mud it looked early in this game. It's important to remember the Wolves don't play again now for 5 days. Next Wednesday is the opener at home against the Thunder. So the Wolves will be sitting around. They'll have I'm sure a couple rest days, 2-3 practice days. Can they click on all cylinders next week? And this is a topic I want to cover more on Monday's show. But I mean, the schedule's pretty forgiving early in the season for the Wolves. They've got a lot of very winnable games. And the question is going to be like, hey, I mean, here's the thing. If they play like they did on Friday against the Nets, against the Thunder next Wednesday, they probably win by a couple possessions. Like it's not a blowout win, but they probably win it relatively comfortably. That's how bad the Thunder are very likely to be this year. And remember, the Wolves won their first 4 preseason games for whatever that's worth. Then they play Utah, who's kind of in a similar, if not worse spot to Oklahoma City. And then you get OKC again. And so they could very easily be 3-0 at this time, or I guess at this time next week, it'd be 2-0. But by the end of next weekend, they could be 3-0, looking at consecutive home games against San Antonio and then the Lakers and then San Antonio again. I mean, there's a real possibility that they're favored in their first 7 games this year, which I could almost guarantee that hasn't happened to the Wolves since 2004 when they were favored in 7 consecutive games. We're talking about the first 7 of the year. If they go say 5-0, they'll definitely be favored at home against the Lakers in game 6. And then they go to Phoenix and you get Milwaukee. It gets a little bit tougher there. You get Phoenix again, and then Memphis, Cleveland. But it's a good thing in that this is a real chance to work out some of these kinks. And, maybe you still go 5-2 over that stretch, but you feel good about the progress you're making offensively, especially. On the flip side, could they have a false sense of security? And I get that I'm putting the cart before the horse here. We're a few steps removed from this being a real concern. But say they win their first 3 or 4 games, and it's like, oh man, this isn't like we figured out this offense thing. But in reality, it's sloppy. You're just playing teams aren't really, frankly, trying to win. Let's call it what it is. And you have 3 top 25 players in the league on your team, according to the ESPN top 100 players survey. So, of course you're going to win those games, right? You're going to win 4 out of every 5 of those games against an inferior opponent, if not more often. And then what happens? Then all of a sudden you play the Lakers and LeBron in a couple Fridays, or you go to Phoenix on national TV on November 1st and you get just absolutely hammered, by 30 to the Suns because you think that your offense is in a good spot, but actually you just played the Thunder and the Spurs a bunch of times. That's possible. That could happen. So it'll be really interesting to see, again, an effort like we saw on Friday gets a win against the Thunder next Wednesday, but it needs to be better. And we'll see how quickly Finch can get this team to grow into that. But at any rate, fun game Friday, nonetheless. Fun to see what this offense could be with Chris Finch running things in Minnesota. I'm really excited to see what this thing turns out to look like here in the next few weeks. All right, let's close the show here today with individual studs and duds. All right, individual studs and duds from the Wolves' loss to the Nets on Friday. Number one stud for me in this game has to be Kyle Anderson. Kyle Anderson, I thought, was the best player on the floor for the Wolves overall in this game. Coming off the bench, played 24 minutes, which was tops of anyone on the bench, actually fifth on the team. He played more than Jaden McDaniels because McDaniels got into foul trouble pretty quickly in this one. But Kyle Anderson was fantastic, scored 11 points on 4 of 6 shooting, made all 3 of his free throw attempts. Did not shoot any threes in this game. 5 rebounds, 3 assists, a steal, and a block in this game. No turnovers. Only committed 1 foul in 24 minutes. Was the Swiss Army knife that we all would expect to see. Did a little bit of everything. Initiated some offense. Had a couple of nice floaters in the lane. A couple really nice defensive plays as well. Was physical and just played a nice, well-rounded game. This is exactly what I would expect out of him nightly this year. 24-20. Probably in general, a little bit less playing time than this on any given night, but 22 to 26 minutes, 9 to 11 points, 3 to 7 rebounds, and, a couple of steals and blocks every game, and solid defense. That's exactly what we got out of Kyle Anderson in this one. Was a ton of fun to watch. And Wolves fans are going to really enjoy watching him throughout the season. Another stud for me in this one, I'm going to actually give it to D'Angelo Russell. And I know he had 6 turnovers, and I normally wouldn't do that. He also had no rebounds, which tough to play 27 minutes in the NBA and not grab a rebound on accident, but he was the only guy on the Wolves that could make shots, and we're grading on a curve here. He was 7 of 13 shooting outside of Kyle Anderson, and I guess Naz Reid only attempted 5 shots. He's the only guy who was anywhere near a respectable shooting percentage. 17 points on 13 shots, 7 of 13 shooting, so greater than 50%, 2 of 5 outside the arc, 1 of 2 at the line. He had 6 assists and 6 turnovers, did have a steal in 27 minutes, but I actually thought he was pretty good in this game. I know he had a couple of bad passes, but as I've said a couple times already, there were also some that were not his fault at all. He was the only guy that actually shot the ball and looked like he believed it was going in, frankly, in this game. Everybody else was kind of willing the ball to go in. You could kind of see them steering, Ant and Cat were releasing the ball and like steering it in and hoping that it would just splash through. And D'Lo played with the classic D'Lo confidence, but backed it up with some good shooting in this game. I thought he played a solid game, so I'm going to give him a stud. And the last one's going to be Rudy Gobert. 16 points, 8 rebounds, 4 steals, 2 assists in this game, a perfect 6 of 6 from the field. The issue, of course, is the 4 of 10 at the line. He's got to go at least 6 of 10, and really 7 of 10, honestly. But if he goes 7 of 10 at the line, suddenly he's got a 19 and 8 game, which looks real nice in just 30 minutes. The 4 steals were awesome. He had a couple real nice deflections, no blocks in this game, but I mentioned earlier there were several plays where he completely influenced the opposing team, their decision-making, and trying to get to the basket. Like, hey, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to challenge this guy. Or, I'm going to make this pass instead of that one because Rudy's there. That was very apparent in this game. And I think that's going to be a nightly occurrence this year. And it takes a lot of pressure off Cat. I mean, Cat was able to get 9 rebounds in 33 minutes. He averaged more minutes and less rebounds, or I guess the same number of rebounds as that last year. But if extrapolated over a full game, that's a double-double for Cat. That's something that we saw less of last year. We saw several rebounds for Towns where Gobert was simply boxing out. Towns was able to get the board. They can help each other out in that way. And I easily could have given that third stud to Towns. I probably could have given it to him over D'Lo. But Towns shot just 4 of 12 and 1 of 6 outside the arc. But besides the 3-point shooting, he was really good. 15 and 9 with 4 assists for Cat. A couple of turnovers, 6 of 7 at the line. So both Towns and Gobert played well in their limited minutes. It's just together, they've got some kinks to work out, especially on the offensive end of the floor. And again, that's not to be surprised, or not. We should not be surprised by that at all. My dud for this game is Jalen Noel. He did not shoot the ball well from the floor. If you don't look at the shooting numbers, it doesn't seem that bad. 6 points, 4 rebounds, 3 steals for Jalen in 20 minutes. But he was 0 of 6 shooting, 0 of 3 outside the arc. He just happened to be 6 of 8 from the line. He was aggressive, which is great. Had a couple of nice jumping passing lane type plays on defense to get the steals. But it was just one of those, like, he had one, I can't remember if it was Sunday against the Clippers. I think it was against the Clippers last time out, where he was a little overly aggressive and the shot just wasn't there, which is unusual. We didn't see too many games like that last year from Jalen. So hopefully he's not pressing too much already, in this kind of this 6-man type role that he's going to be in this season, presumably. But he did not have a great game. Just did not look really with it throughout. And I'm not going to give one to Ant because I gave it to Noel already. But Ant shot 4 of 14, another tough game for him. Outside of a really hot stretch in the third quarter, he seemed a little bit disinterested at times, which, like, hey, it's the preseason, whatever. But that can't happen in the regular season, and it's something to keep an eye on because we've seen those kind of negative flashes at times over the past couple of years from Ant, but they've been less and less as his career's gone on, the whole 2 years he's played. But he shot just 4 of 14 in this game, 3 of 7 outside the arc, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, did have a couple of blocks as well, also a couple of turnovers. So kind of a mixed bag for Anthony Edwards in this one. And that's really it in terms of observations. The bench this was close to a real rotation. No Jordan McLaughlin. I believe he's got some sort of illness. This is the second straight game he hasn't played in, but this could be your 10, plus Jordan McLaughlin, depending on matchups. And you have Kyle Anderson and Jalen Noel each played more than 20 minutes off the bench. And Bryn Forbes played 18 minutes. So I guess, Austin Rivers did get into the game too. He didn't really play until the very end of the game. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, this was pretty close to what you're going to see for a real rotation for Minnesota. So that's it for the preseason. We'll talk some additional takeaways on the preseason Monday. We'll do our season preview as well as a preview of, I think I said on the other day that the first game of the season was Tuesday. I don't know why I had that in my head. It's definitely Wednesday the 19th. The NBA regular season kicks off on Tuesday the 18th. The Wolves play on the 19th at home against Oklahoma City. So we've got an extra day next week to do season, which is good because otherwise I would have missed planning this out by a day. But I want to do season win totals. I want to do Wolves projections next week. It's going to be a lot of fun. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, this background will be a lot more exciting next week. I'm going to switch locations a little bit, have a new place to podcast, going to have something besides a white wall behind me. So get excited for that. That's all happening next week in celebration of the start of the season. We'll do win totals, we'll do season preview stuff, and then on Wednesday we'll preview Wolves Thunder and have a very special live postcast guest that will be joining me this year immediately following, or I guess give or take immediately following the game, but a very special guest that will be on postcast all games Monday through Thursday throughout the season. So we'll announce that next week, so stay tuned for that as well. Otherwise, that's all I have for today. Have a fantastic weekend. Thanks once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken. You can find Locked On Sports Minnesota, the app, on Roku or Amazon Fire. It's absolutely free. You can also not just this podcast, but all the other Locked On Minnesota pods can be found on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on either Roku or Amazon Fire TV. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. The Locked On Podcast Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. You can now make your second listen the Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview 2022. It's a 6-episode extravaganza to get you ready for the NBA season. The local team experts and the NBA insiders of the Locked On Podcast Network and Odyssey all combined into one Ultimate NBA Preview. I am on the On the Rise Teams episode that's out there. Go find it. Search for the Ultimate Pro NBA Preview 2022 on your Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.